I don't really want to look at the RB25 versus the RB26 from today's standards. Instead, I want to look at it from a few years down the road from now. And if the supply of the RB26 brand new blocks don't make their way into the market, then the RB25 is going to have to be a substitute for the RB26. I wonder if the RB25, though it may be an inferior design, how inferior actually is it to the RB26, and could it squirt out similar numbers?
I actually straight up looked RB25 versus RB26, and they had a whole bunch of RB26s versus 2JZs, nothing comparing the in-house engines. But I had to do a little bit of research on the RB26, and see these two turbos? That comes into play a little bit later on with the variable timing.
In this video, we're going to be going over the RB26 versus the RB25. Now, simply put it, I can just put the specs down. Now, I don't want to make a video regurgitating what you can't already look up on Google. Now, I can simply put the specs, the differences between the two engines, and I probably would do that later on to build context into this video. But what I want to talk about is the potential these engines possess, the feasibility of actually improving or upgrading the engine, and the clout, the stature, or the prestige that one engine has over the other.
Does it make sense to put that expensive AF engine into your cheap-ass car?
So why not do some research like I'm doing right now on my botched R34 brought to me by the Waste Your Time Center. I hope you're watching this video. So what do I do next? Do I buy me a brand new RB26 billet block because those blocks are rare as they come? Or do I buy me a used RB26 from eBay, $16,000? You don't know what you're getting. Do I buy me a RB26 from Mazworks? Or leave the RB25? Let's look at these two examples. We got a rolling chassis, which is the same car as mine. At least mine runs. Sold for 18,000 euros. It does have a roll cage and a few extra bits. This one's for sale right now. This one was already sold. This one's for sale over $100,000, 100,000 pounds. And this is an RB25, about, what is it, 500 horsepower? All ready to go. I think this is the name of the company, Gzilla, and this is some of the specs that they have for their vehicle. Let me bring it over here to my Mustang. Talk about Mustangs to clarify a few things with the Skyline. Walk with me. This is the vintage racing rules for racing a 60s, 70s era's Mustang. And if you have a 65 Mustang, the max engine size that you can run with is a 289. Put that right there for now. If you have a 68 Mustang, you can run a 302. But you can't have updated the chassis. The chassis on this thing has been completely updated. No more leaf springs, it's on coils. The whole front end's just, the towers have been taken out. And that right there is not a 289. It's not even a 302, it's a 351. So it is not allowed. This car it's been canceled as far as vintage racing. So if you have yourself a R34 and you want to race it, what options are there? I mean, do you have to stick with the original engine, or can you upgrade to whatever engine they sold those years? This is that car we saw earlier, and it has an RB25. Can you update it to an RB26 and still be qualified to run race series with the GTR? Or is this just a track day, have fun with your car? Either way, I'm gonna turn my car into a race car, a track day car. Track day killer, time attack. Let's go over engine specs, why don't we? Both are inline 6-cylinders. One's a twin turbo, one's a single turbo. The displacement is 3 to 4% larger on the RB26. Cylinder bore and piston stroke are roughly the same. Compression ratio is the same, except asterisk 9:1. We'll get to that in a second. But this engine creates more horsepower than this engine. But is that not to say that this engine can't create the horsepower that this engine does? Is this block weaker? Is there a design flaw about this engine that it can't create the horsepower of this engine? Because there's a bit of information we forgot to add to these specs.
If life were black and white, it would be simple. The RB26 versus the RB25. This is how much horsepower it made from factory. This is how much horsepower that made from factory. It's all good. But it's not as simple as that. Yes, the RB26 makes more power and can make more power, but is that because the amount of research and development went into the RB25, I'm still willing to bet it won't create as much power as the RB26. But what's the difference in CC? I mean, 3-4%? Would the difference in power be 3 or 4%? That's the question. But what we need to look at is the availability of this engine, because the RB26 is difficult to get your hands on unless you got some money.
So in this video, Adam LZ goes to dyno his car, but he says something interesting here.
One of the really cool things about the fact that we have an RB25 instead of the 26 is that we have VTC. This is a great indication of working VTC versus not working VTC down here. So if we had a 26, we'd be making about 100 horsepower lower at what, 4,000 RPM? Yeah, about 4,000 RPM. So you can see the difference when the VTC kicks on and off. 121 versus 177 at 3,800 RPM. It helps the turbo come in a lot faster. That's crazy.
Anyway, so with that said, and then we're not going to keep going in the video, he was just talking about how VTCs might be an advantage. These two turbos, one of the turbos was to come on early for the lack of torque, which, you know what, the RB25 has that variable timing, which could alleviate that, because that's double. I don't know if that's double the effort, but it just gets in the way where you can have more room for activities if you have just a single turbo. Okay, we have this guy who talks about which block is best. So I can't see the difference between the RB25 and RB26 block in the sense of one will just destroy the other. In fact, the RB26 four-wheel drive one cracks, and that's they JB welded it, and that's the sign of manhood, a rite of passage to owning an R34 GTR. That's not something you're gonna have with an RB25, which actually lends itself to thinking, hey, this engine's cheaper than the RB25. It's going to have less problems. In fact, that's what the conclusion they come to in the video is that other than new manufactured RB26s, which they are hitting the market very expensive, the RB25 is cheap. And look at, we got this guy making 455 kilowatts, which, just rough math, that's over 500 horsepower to the wheels. That means the engine's doing 600. Anyway, so this thing made 250 horsepower. Oh man, that's not bad. That is not bad at all. So the reason this is relevant to this is because we're looking at power for RB25. I think that's OEM. So this is when we start getting into the nitty gritty about the RB25 and this guy. Anyways, this guy, go all the way back to the beginning, because this is what he does. He shows all these cars, and this isn't even a freaking
The
car
attack
show.
cars, time attack.
This is a great
race cars that they have at
channel.
this.
That
I'm not even gonna try to pronounce this racetrack, but I know I've raced here in Gran Turismo. Sure, there are a few RB26 GTRs, even a few S13 Silvias, S14s with their SR20s. That seems to be a theme at this event. People are taking their OEM power plants, and it appears they're maxing them out. I do with this R34, this blue one. I wish the hood was open and I could have seen what engine, what setup they had going on there. But the field is random with a variety of eclectic cars on display. So that poses the question, what am I doing with my car? And does my idea match up with what I have access to due to the Godzilla tax? That's right. You've heard of the Toyota tax or the 2J tax. Well, the Godzilla tax is alive and well. I guess to have a car here, the parameters are they need to be somewhere in between outrageous and in stock form, somewhere that lies in the middle. So does that mean that my RB25 is technologically inferior to the other engines that are on display? I don't think so. I think it's the lack of development, the lack of research for that engine, the lack of cars that are actually in race form. I think that's going to change, especially with the market for the R34s being imported into the United States, especially the West Coast. If you're Australian and you have a company doing research and development on RB25s, RB30s, RB26s, get ready, because a whole bunch of new pocketbooks are about to be opened up, and who knows what the future holds.
I have an R34. Why don't I drop in a VK56 from an LMP3 Daytona engine. Just destroy the field. But the problem is, there won't be a field to destroy. I might have the biggest, baddest car that can shit on everybody, but if there's nobody to shit on, where's the fun in that?
We all remember that guy, or maybe you were that guy, that kid that had the V6 Mustang or Camaro that did everything in your power, all in vain, to get your car equivalent to the V8 counterpart. K&N filter, synthetic oil, octane boost.
And what your teenage mind couldn't comprehend is what the future had in store.
I mean, unless you have the ability to build your engine up from scratch, ground up to any specs that you want, you're at the mercy of any given chosen manufacturer to build off of their platform, their power plant, and modify that engine. It's interesting, the research and development of an engine, depending on where it sits in the whole economy of the world. For example, if you take the 5-liter LS style engine, the aftermarket for that engine is exploded because it's an affordable engine that people like to make go fast. The cast iron engine, even the new aluminum blocked engine these days. I mean, you can really, just the 5.3 liter. I don't even know what you can do to those things. Cam, supercharger, forced induction, whatever. I wonder, as far as the 6.0 LS, if the research and development, I'm sure that 6.0, what is that, an LS3, is a gnarly engine. But if you look at that on like the placement of engines in order for them to get their research and development, if you take the Chevy 350, no new research and development has been going on that engine because it's been replaced by the new small block. But the research and development on a 351 Ford is still ongoing to this day. They got some really good breathing heads. It's just interesting how an engine excels. The top of the line engine being an RB26, did it excel because it had the research and development of the aftermarket companies, including Nissan themselves, Nismo, whatever, HKS, and all the guys who really souped those engines up? And they neglected the RB25, which is inherently a lesser engine than the RB26. Does it have that drastic of a deficit from the RB26? Is the RB25 that much worse off? And right now, the RB26 is absolutely unattainable for rich people even. I'm telling you, it just doesn't make financial sense to spend $40,000 on an engine to put in a car that, oh my God, unless you already have a GTR. So if you're putting it in a non-GTR, the investment to me, it just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, right now, the RB25s are going for about $5,000 on eBay. Let me look up. I don't think the RB25s were ever sold in the US. And this is from the West Coast point of view of the first of 2023. These engines are on average $5,000. That's just me looking real quick. They could probably be on average $4,000. It could be higher. I don't know. The most expensive one I saw was $9,000, and then they had the cheap ones. So the availability of the RB25 makes it an interesting thing to look at as far as maybe maxing out that engine and having research and development come into that, because I'm telling you, the R34 is coming to America, and it is coming soon. I think it's actually coming. It's coming next year. You're going to start seeing R34s legal in America starting next year. And I can't even bring mine in until 2025. Now, here's another interesting way of looking at the RB25 versus the RB26 comparison. We have to bring in the 390 versus 351 Windsor. I know it's American domestic Ford, but the comparison will make sense. If you damage that 390 block, that's an expensive engine to replace. The aftermarket support for that 351 is a heck of a lot more than when it comes to that 390. Let's hypothetically say that the 390 creates a gobs more horsepower than the 351 just in its natural state. Who's to say that because of the aftermarket support with that 351 is it strong as it is that you can't overcome the inherent technological advantage of that 390? And that's just hypothetically speaking. If, for example, that RB26 is just an inherently better designed engine, the availability of, and this isn't to say in 5 years from now it won't be swapped as these RB26s are entering the market, but as we sit right now, the only thing holding back the RB25 versus the RB26 is the research and development of that engine. Like for like, you would think it's comparing apples to oranges, but the stroke, the strength, everything when it comes to the RB26 versus RB25 on paper seems to be roughly the same.
RB26 versus LS. You talk about how
all the engines compete with one another. Sure, they're different eras, but in 10, 20 years time, it won't matter because these engines are going to be, they're going to be banned anyways. So why not get your hands on them so you can know what I'm talking about, or at least have the ability to have the fun. RB26 versus an LS. That's going to have to be the premise of the video, and you're going to number one have to convince people that these are this comparison is actually a worthwhile comparison, because I mean, sure, you're looking at half the displacement. Like the numbers don't make sense, but these power plants are going to be going in vehicles that will potentially race against one another. I understand for the specific rules for a race series, even homologated race series, you could take someone with an endless supply of money, deep pockets. They upgrade their suspension, their engine, and they destroy the field, which discourages anybody from even entering because they know they're going to get destroyed. And there's an element of nostalgic for the historic racing, which comes into play. I mean, you don't want some dude to show up with a Frankenstein car and just take away from what the vehicle was originally. Or do you? Is that what you do want? Do you want someone to show up with their car that has completely gutted it, put a NASCAR engine in it, Formula One hybrid design, and just shits on the field? Maybe that's what you want.